Hello and welcome to Undrafted, a Dynasty game theory podcast brought to you by the Undroppables. I am your host, Scott Belanger, a.k.a. Jax Falcone. You can find me on Twitter at Dino Game Theory. This is episode number 217. Thanks for tuning in. You know what that means. It's the JJ Pod. We're here with JJ Zachariason this week. I'd be remiss not to say recording on the eve of the Celtics going down 3-1 and losing Jason Tatum to an Achilles tear. Really tough to be awake and functioning, especially considering my 9-year-old son is a super fan. His second year being a fan. First year we walked through, win it all. Second year, it's utter chaos and disappointment, and the boy is crying. So just, there's sports in a nutshell. He thought every year was just going to be walk through, win a championship, just like us in Dynasty. No, not so fast. Everything can unwind. But we're not here to talk about the NBA and my Celtics. We're here to talk fantasy football, and most specifically, making some sense of the rookies have now landed. We are starting to see some ADPs. I really want to start to get a little bit deeper and start to get a little bit more into the 2025 season and what we expect and just some things of that nature, starting to place these rookies in and among the other players, the veterans, and starting to formulate my dynasty ranks with rookies in them. No better person to talk to than the great JJ Zachariason. JJ, welcome to Undrafted, and thank you for being here. What's up, buddy?
Thanks for having me, man. Always a pleasure to chop it up, talk some Dynasty with one of the best game theory minds, if you will, out there.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that's the idea. And, it's funny that you say that because, you appeal to a broad audience, but you are a very great game theory player to begin with, right? Like, that's who you are. Granted, your audience is broad, but I think your sort of approach to things has always been so sound, and your process above results. And I couldn't help but this will be pimping your show, which if you don't listen to already, kind of crazy. I mean, everybody listens to the JJ show, but if you don't, you can go listen to his most recent show, which caught my attention this morning as I was literally waking up. I was like, I guess I'll listen to JJ's new show, considering I'm having him on the show today. And it was the gray area show, range of outcomes sort of thing. And I'm like, oh my God, dude, that's me. What a coincidence. He's doing a show that I would totally love, this theory of being in the gray area, understanding range of outcomes and possibilities. I'll listen to it. Turns out, not only is it that, but it's also about your trade in our league, which just, I was so smitten by all that. I was blown away. But yeah, it's so much fun to hear that show this morning. So, whatever. I don't know what I'm
no, I enjoyed putting it together. Sometimes, and I even said this to folks in the late round fantasy football Discord today, where I was like, sometimes I do shows that I need to do for myself.
Yes.
Like that was a show that I put together that I just needed to say some things, and I said those things, and it felt very good to do. And it's going to resonate with some people, and some people are going to be like, I don't like this at all. Stop talking about Rome Odunze. And that's fine. That's the way it goes. That's why I'm publishing it in May and not August.
Yes. Well, it turned out it was the Dynasty Game Theory Invitational, which I actually had Justin Boone on last week, who's in that league. We talked a little bit about that league. And I think you're right. Like, talking about your own league is not very entertaining to the audience. I would agree with that. But I do think that referencing leagues that are competitive and the game theory and the play behind that, the decision-making, I think is very interesting and entertaining for the listener. And I think you did a great job of that because you weren't talking about like, and now I get, I don't know. It was great analysis. It also brought up a trade that I guess we can touch on for a quick sec before we get into everything. It was a 14-team league, and that's the thing that people who listen to this show and our Dynasty people get this. It's a 14-team league. You had the 106 or 5. What'd you have, the 105?
I had the 106.
106, and you traded Rome Odunze for the 108. And I was like, when it happened, I was like, it's a good trade. I like that trade. I like that trade for him. It gives him, and I stated the reasons to you, but it gave you flexibility. It gave you a reroll on Odunze in short order that, look, if things go bad for him, you lose that asset. You're basically sort of doubling down on that asset right now. Hey, just give me a reroll on it. It's a possibility that he ascends and beats that value of mid first. But there's also a lot of outcomes, and this is what I think your basic premise was. There's a lot of outcomes where he doesn't beat that. So why not cash in on it now? And then it gives you flexibility. You can, get an Emeka Egbuka, which we talked before the show. We both independently of one another have them back to back in our rankings, Dynasty rankings. So point of the matter, it is a perfect reroll. It's his perfect value, but it also gives you the opportunity to go running back, to trade the pick, to utilize the pick to do something else, to package it. Once it's on the clock, it becomes more valuable. So I thought it was a great short-term and long-term play. And I think that was your point. And somehow or another, I don't know who the hell was saying it was a bad play, but apparently you got roasted a bit about it. Was that basically what happened?
Yeah, I mean, look, I wrote in a newsletter a couple trades that I recently did. It's a slow time of year, like I said, so it's harder to come up with content and stuff. So I'm like, sure, I'll write about some trades because it's rookie draft season. We're all trading a lot right now. So I wrote up a couple of trades, and one of them was the Odunze for the 108, and that article then that newsletter found itself on Reddit, and just given the Reddit sort of feedback, I'd say like 70 to 80% of people were probably on the Odunze side versus the 108 side.
Yeah.
And that's fine, whatever.
Yeah.
I just don't see it as a 80-20, 70-30 kind of trade. I see it as a 50-50 trade. Like you said. The weird thing to me, again, in that episode, I broke down like why there is a downside case to Odunze, and sure, I understand the upside. Of course, I understand the upside. And I understand that like his numbers from his rookie season need context, and I'm trying to provide it some context and all that kind of stuff. But the one interesting thing is that if we're looking strictly at like median outcome here for Odunze and forget Egbuka for a second, but just median outcome for a guy like Odunze, what happens if he hits his median outcome this year? Because his median outcome right now for 2025 from a projection standpoint is like a fringe wide receiver 3. If you look at rankings, if you look at Mike Clay's projections, my projections, Clay, who's the gold standard with projections, has Odunze right now at wide receiver 39. And so my question to people would be, if Odunze hits that median outcome of wide receiver 39 this year, if he's a fringe wide receiver 3, what's going to happen to his dynasty value next year? It's going to tank. It's going to, and so to me, that move, my roster in that, I think it's a roster dependent move. Like if you want to embrace a little bit more variance on your roster, then you can hold on to an asset like that. My roster in that league in particular is pretty deep at wide receiver. I probably have the best wide receivers, or at least top 3 or so, in that league. I needed running backs badly because that's just the way that I build teams, is I wait to the last minute to get running backs. Literally, Scott, the only running backs on my roster going into the rookie draft were Chase Brown and Isaiah Pacheco, which both of them ended up winning out with the draft.
Right.
Yeah. But I needed running backs desperately to compete this year. And I want to compete this year because if you look at the value of the team, it's probably a top 2 or 3 value-wise team in the league. You can run that through all the various sites that look at that kind of thing. And so I said to myself, okay, if I get the 108, Emeka Egbuka is my worst case scenario here, as opposed to taking on the volatile asset of Rome Odunze. And if I don't get Egbuka, the better option for my roster, especially, would have been Quinshon Judkins. Then I did flip like a third, which is more of like a late third in a normal league, given this is 14 teams. I did move up a spot to get Quinshon Judkins to sort of just lock that in. I could have just sat there and gotten like RJ Harvey or something if I wanted to, but from a prospecting standpoint, I do like Judkins more. There's plenty of flags, sure, but I think that, the dynasty community will make excuses for higher end prospects pretty frequently. And so if Judkins has kind of a down year with Cleveland, I'm still okay with the fact that he'll probably still hold decent value year over year, just given the fact that he was an early second round pick. He has to really, really go downhill and not have a good rookie season for it to not at least like give us decent year 2 value. So I saw this more as a narrower range of outcome situation for my team by getting the 108, whereas Odunze has a wider range. I see the scenario where Odunze could be a top 10 wide receiver next year in Dynasty, scenario where everyone wishes they would have traded him in 2025. So it's just a range of outcomes.
Yeah. And I mean, You don't need to to explain it even further to this audience. I mean that with all due respect to this audience, because they get that. They understand it's the range of outcomes. And again, you ended up getting Quinshon Judkins and TreVeyon, right? Is that how you
Yeah.
ended up?
Yeah. Those are the
Yeah.
two. Yeah.
So,
And then
so I
yeah.
mean, you basically changed your roster in a way that moves towards competing. It's a process play, and I think that the best dynasty managers understand that if you were in a rebuild situation, which you were a year and two
Yeah.
ago,
A couple
that
of years ago. Yeah.
you made different moves, that you were leaning into wide receivers, you were leaning into trading away assets, you were leaning into all these other things, that breaking assets, premium assets into multiple assets,
Yep.
all these strategies that we always tell people to employ, that you have to use these strategies specifically to achieve the outcome you're trying to achieve. And when you're competing, it's like, yeah, TreVeyon and Judkins sounds great. I'm in a league where I'm completely rebuilding. I think I've got a couple of quarterbacks and like one or two pieces. That's it. It's actually the undrafted league, which is it's an exact replica of the Dynasty Game Theory League, except with my listeners, and it's really cool because it's also 14 teams. It's the same exact thing. And my team is dog shit. I had the 102, the 14, the 16, the 113, the 201, the 26, the 27, 28. I've got a bunch of picks. And even still, even with all those picks, I sat on the clock and ran out the clock at 1-2, traded back to the 104 or 5, whatever it was. I can't remember now. I had the 102. So the 105. Then I traded that back one more time. Like, I kept trading so that I could get as much value out of this. And I ended up making some picks, but yeah, maybe in another league I would have just taken Omari, and if I'm ready to go, I'll just take Omari and Hampton and blah blah blah. So each strategy is based off what your team looks like. It's not to say, oh, at 102 you have to take Hampton. It's at 102, yeah, take Hampton if you're ready to compete. Otherwise, consider trying to split that asset into multiple assets going forward. And I think that's really what you were also thinking there is, hey, here's my opportunity. Rome may not be a win now piece. He's kind of a value piece more than he's a production piece. Truly, he's a value piece, not a production piece. I'm looking for production pieces. Give me 2 production pieces. Off I go. It was brilliant. I thought you won the trade.
And here's the thing. In the worst case, I would get a value piece in Emeka Egbuka, right? Like that was the worst case scenario. And whereas I think I agree, Adunze is a value piece right now, but he's a value piece that can go, and it's very volatile. That can go and whereas a guy like Emeka Egbuka is probably going to stay pretty steady year over year, similar to what we just saw with Rome Odunze.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It re-rolls the same opportunity to hold value to get Egbuka, which, by the way, I've been getting a ton of Egbuka. I want to start the show by basically asking you the question that I think I have an answer to this question, so I would assume you probably do too, which has been, what is your general strategy when approaching this rookie class and rookie drafts right now? Like, when you see the board, what is the overarching sort of like, here's what I see and how I'm going to play it in a general sense? Because I don't know if that's too broad, but let me know if you can make sense of that answer.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say that we're not often each year rewarded or awarded the ability to have these distinct tiers like we have this year, where it's sort of a choose your own adventure based on what your current roster makeup looks like, right?
Yeah.
There are many tiers, in my opinion, in this year's draft and in this year's rookie draft that have a mix of both running back and wide receiver. And in tight end premium, you can throw in the tight ends in there as well.
Yeah.
Quarterback, obviously, hopefully you don't need a quarterback this season because it's not as strong. But I think that's what I've at least seen is the fact that, like, you could be in the late first and into the second and be getting players that fit whatever you specifically need. For instance, one tier that I think is relatively distinct based on like the Zab model and the things that I look at would be like RJ Harvey, Caleb Johnson, Luther Burden, and Matthew Golden. Let's just put those 4 together, right? And people can disagree. That's totally fine. That's not what this is about. And so you look at those 4, and I think this is just the perfect example of sort of what this draft gives us. But you look at those 4 and you could say, I need a wide receiver to win now. Maybe you would lean Matthew Golden over Luther Burden. You say, I want a running back to win now. Maybe you lean RJ Harvey over Caleb Johnson. But then you say, I can wait a little bit. I'm rebuilding. I want to maintain value. Well, I think RJ Harvey is a more volatile asset than Caleb Johnson is.
Right.
And Caleb Johnson could be a bell cow next year if Jalen Warren's not on the Steelers anymore. So then all of a sudden you go with Caleb Johnson instead of RJ Harvey. And then the same deal with Luther Burden, who I think is a better prospect and has a higher ceiling than a player like Matthew Golden. So you could just go with Luther Burden over a player like Golden if you're able to wait and maybe you're not as competitive this year.
Right.
To me, there are pockets like that throughout. And you can really, to your point, if you have the 102 and Amarian Hampton's going to be a player that a lot of teams want because everyone needs running backs all the time.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I don't need this right now. That tier goes about 5 deep and you could get back to the 105 and still get a Tet McMillan or a Travis Hunter or whoever ends up falling at wide receiver in that spot.
Right.
That to me, it's more distinct this year than it has been in years past. But then on top of that, there's just a very, very, very clear wall, in my opinion, when you get to that mid-second round range, which is generally, usually the case. But I would argue there's a stronger drop off this year than what we've seen in the past. And so
totally agree.
So like, don't get too, caught up in trade calcs and like what late second rounders really mean, for purposes of those trade calculators, because to me, a lot of the late seconds this year are not that much different than early to mid thirds. Like it's just not,
Agreed.
There's not that much of a distinction. So I think that those are the two things. If I were to sort of generalize what's going on here, the tiers are clear cut and allows you to be really, really flexible, which is another reason why I liked trading for the 108 in that case. But then also there is that wall, and be aware of that wall. There might be one or two players where you see them on the other side of the wall, what have you, but there is, you get to that point where you're like, oh, okay, I'm in a pretty sketchy area of the draft all of a sudden.
So this has been something that we all agree. I think everybody that I know who has a pretty good understanding of this draft certainly talks about that mid-second cliff, and it exists. I think it's real. I've been trying to tell our listeners both here and on the underground to do what they can to get into, that tier. If you're at the 208, 209 and pre-draft, you offer the 28 and the 209 or the 209 for the 205 or something like that, and you offer a third, fourth pick swap in the future, people will take that.
Yeah.
Because they're like, dude, a couple of spots and I get to move up a whole round in the future. That's great. I only have to move back a couple spots. But if I sent that to JJ, he'd be like, not me, pal.
I think you did actually in our league.
For sure. I'm sending it anyway, just to test you. But no, but it's true. You have to really test those waters and not assume that the other person, the other manager, doesn't see it that way. Maybe they don't see it that way. I just moved up. I just shared it with the guys. I moved up from the whatever it was a 211 to the 208. Somehow it's a super tight end premium kind of thing, and a couple of weird things that happen. It's definitely a weird league. And I moved from the 211 to the 208 to draft Trey Harris at the 208, which I thought was criminal.
Yeah.
And all I had to give up was Ben Sinnott.
Right.
It's like, dude, that's not the difference. The difference is way more than that. I was prepared to pay more if I got, I'm ready to go. But like, that's all it took. I sent, offer accepted. That person was like, whatever, I pick up a free Ben Sinnott. No, you didn't. Right. You gave up a huge amount of value, in my personal opinion. Now, I could be wrong. Again, it's process over results. We'll see. Ben Sinnott's going to be a friggin', all pro, and Trey Harris goes out the league. Okay, of course. But in general, I'll do that every single time when I see that cliff. Long story short, I think that's right. Now, where I think there's a difference of opinion, and this is where I think you and I are going to have some fun in this conversation, is I have Tet McMillan and Travis Hunter as my wide receivers 1 and wide receivers 2 in this class. I don't disagree. I'm not pushing back. If I'm on the clock and they're all the wide receivers on the board and I'm forced to pick, I'm picking Hunter or Tet. Mm-hmm. That's fine. What I do think there is, though, is that I think the early second to those early first round wide receivers is about as small a gap as I've seen in some time. And I think it's based off the fact that we're not seeing a Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors level prospect at that 102, 103 as we have sometimes in the past. And then also, I think the Luther Burden, in my eyes, Jaden Higgins, if you want to say Matthew Golden, Trey Harris types in that early second are better than some traditional season. So that kind of shrinks that gap. And I love playing the game of selling the pick that I'm about to take Tet with and getting Jaden Higgins plus a future first. I kind of re-roll, get a player, not the same, by the way. I'm not saying that Jaden Higgins is the same, but I think there's a little bit more of a muted difference between, in my opinion, the wide receivers there. But I do see a big difference between the first 4 or 5 running backs that you have to take at, like RJ Harvey and even Caleb are in the first round. They're not early second round picks, almost never, right? So there isn't that same type of arbitrage play at the running back position that I see at the wide receiver position. And I've been playing that, maybe to my detriment. Maybe I'm going to turn around and be like, dude, Jaden Higgins was a bum. Matthew Golden, bum. Trey Harris, bum. All these guys were bums. I should have just been picking Tet and Hunter, but I see it differently. What are your thoughts?
I don't think that's a horrible approach at all. I mean, like I look at what the ZAP model says from a scoring perspective, and it ranks it as Hunter as number 1. That's mostly based on draft capital, because his advanced analytics really weren't that strong at the end of the day. They weren't bad, but for a first round wide receiver, they weren't as elite as, Matt Harmon's reception perception saying that he's like the best wide receiver he's ever charted, and then with Tet McMillan, McMillan scored, I'd say, I guess a little bit worse than like an Adunze did last year for me. So like last year, I had the model had Neighbors 1, Marvin Harrison 2, but they were both like super, uber elite. And then there was sort of this drop to Adunze, right? So I'd put Tet sort of in that like Adunze type tier and grouping. They had similar draft capital.
By the way, so if I may, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I agree, right? You've seen our model, which is totally different, which is cool. Actually, it's actually fun to see them both. Our model takes more points away for losing draft capital than it does add points to get draft capital, which changes the way that the model sort of sees a player. In other words, if you're overdrafted, it's not going to help you. the model's not going to save you because you got draft capital. It's going to basically keep you where you are and say, hey, sorry, man, try next year. Whereas if you were a player that slipped, you're more likely to lose draft capital. Anyway, long story short is still both of our models have and this is what I thought actually going in, was that this Tet McMillan is somewhat like a Rome Odunze. Well, Rome Odunze was the wide receiver 3. Certainly, I think for most, a little bit of a pretty solid step down. For me, he was. It sounds like for you, he was too, from the Neighbors, Marvin Harrison. So he's more of he should be the 108 is, I guess, what I'm saying. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I can see that. I think that with the way that I sort of view the guys like Hunter and McMillan is the fact that I think that, number one, I like both landing spots. And I think that the landing spot aspect, obviously we don't want to weigh it too heavily, but I don't think it can be totally ignored. But then number 2, I do think that the market sentiment is still going to be something that I care about in those scenarios. Right. And so I think that a guy like McMillan, who should walk in and immediately be his team's wide receiver 1, because everyone else there is pretty not great. I mean, I like Jalen Coker a lot, but he's not a guy who's going to command, 25% target share. And so he walks in and he can be sort of that number 1 guy. I always said throughout the process, like, I didn't see him as a Drake London-esque prospect. I thought London was a better, he's like the better version of Tet McMillan. But I think McMillan had some traits that are like a T. Higgins or a Cortland Sutton, those kinds of players that can give us a wide receiver 2 type season in the right environment, in the right offense. And so I think he found a decent environment. Like, of course, Bryce Young has to maintain and continue, but I think because of that, I am okay with, like, let me give you the hypothetical that might help you sort of wrap your head around what I'm saying. Emeka Egbuka graded out almost identically to Tet McMillan in my model, even when you factor in draft capital. So like they were 0.3 points apart. So it's fairly close between the two. Now I know that the scale is 0 to 100. So Tet McMillan was at 96.1, I want to say, and Emeka Egbuka was at 95.8. And so both of them were in the like elite producer category. We see very, very good wide receivers, land in those spots. The only reason I have Egbuka down a tier from where McMillan is because of the landing spot and because of the market sentiment, right? So like skill-wise, talent-wise, I'm with you. Like I think that a guy like Egbuka, I mean, heck, I could make the bowl argument for Luther Burden even, right? I mean, I think there's a really scary floor case for Burden, but if you're only looking at ceiling, I could make a very similar argument. So I get that from that perspective for sure. I have felt more comfortable, drafting a late first, Egbuka or Caleb Johnson or RJ Harvey or whomever, than spending that like 104, 103 on a Tet McMillan for sure.
Yeah.
I actually barely have gotten Tet as a result of that. I don't even know if it was, it might just be just my positioning in my leagues and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, like, I think it's a fair thing to point out. I just, I don't know how many drafts we're going to see where we have, like we did last year, with multiple, like truly, truly elite players at the position. And
Right.
I think Tet is fine. Like,
Yes.
I don't think you're going to walk away from your rookie drafts and a year from now look back and be like, I'm really, really, really mad that I got Tech McMillan. But you
No,
might sit there and say, I could have gotten better value if I did trade back and
that's
get,
it. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's right. I think a lot of times what I'm pushing back against, not to you, but to the crowd sometimes, and to myself actually. This is like, we do this in our brains because our brains work a certain way. Is we go, oh, wide receiver one. There he is. That's the wide
yeah,
receiver one. And it's like, well, not every wide receiver one is created the same. As a matter of fact, when you were talking, I was thinking our model has Tet McMillan and Luther Burden almost scoring identically. And I don't think they're identical prospects, but I do think they're close enough that
right.
if I'm able to trade from the 103 to the 203, meaning I'm able to trade Tet McMillan for Luther Burden. Let's just say that is the value. I mean, obviously, sometimes Luther Burden goes much earlier, but you get my point. Okay,
Yeah,
so to the 201 or the 112, whatever the case is, to do that move, oftentimes 103 to 201 or that area is an additional future first. Would I rather have Luther Burden and a future first or Tet? I'll take Luther and a first, is my point. Whereas I wouldn't always say that. I wouldn't have said that last year about Keon Coleman in a first
right.
versus Malik Neighbors. That would,
Yeah,
even at the moment, I was not advocating for that.
yeah.
So I think it's a little bit more of a muted tier, but I do see that they're definitely, especially like you say, the landing spot for Tet is about as good as we could hope for in terms of target share.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
maybe not touchdown upside. I mean, there's some concerns there with that offense. It could just be you never know, especially an outside player like that, small quarterback. We'll see just how
Yeah.
great the Tet McMillan efficiency is in that offense. Put it this way, we saw something very similar with a much better prospect in Marvin Harrison Jr. in Arizona. That prototype, that outside player, is sometimes hard to get home in fantasy. And that's one of my other concerns with Tet. Travis Hunter, I maybe have less of him. I mean, although he's a little bit of a unique case study, but that's my concern with Tet. Any thoughts on that before I move on?
Yeah, I think it's fair. With Marvin Harrison Jr., I think that part of it is definitely going to be scheme based, and I feel better about like a Dave Canales and what he might be able to draw up and scheme up for a player like Tet. But yeah, I mean, look, like a lot of like again, going back to Emeka Egbuka, like he's a much easier player to
Yeah,
project. And I think, I've sort of gotten to this point. This is something I talked to Pat Corain a lot about, who really is a great dynasty thinker as well. But he,
smart.
yeah, super sharp dude. And the one thing that I think that we get wrong sometimes in dynasty is we're so concerned about floor and ceiling when we should just be more concerned about floor than we are, because the ceiling often will still come with a high floor player, like, or what
Yeah.
we perceive as a high floor player. Like, I think Egbuka is a really good example of this, because people kind of see him as just this like solid prospect, but solid prospects in good environments become great players in fantasy
Bingo.
football.
Bingo.
So I think it's
Yeah.
really important to look at it that way too.
Yeah, totally. I've been pushing back on the Emeka Egbuka low ceiling play because it's like, did we see the ceiling with Amon Ra? It's
Right.
like, yeah, I guess not, but it's there. And he's slot only, and I don't even think Ibuka's slot only. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's the perception again. All these things that we sort of like to say that. First of all, the game is played through the slot more and more than it has ever been. It used to be, a lot more two wide receiver sets historically. Now much more multiple wide receiver sets, 3 and 4. And so oftentimes the slot is the quicker, easier, more open, target on the field, more, especially in a PPR format. They're getting maybe a little bit less efficient targets. I don't know, but they're getting targeted more and more. You look around the league, JSN, Amon Ra, CeeDee Lamb plays mostly out of the slot. Cooper Kupp with his Triple Crown season played out of the slot. So the upside is there for a slot player, even if you say he is slot only.
The interesting thing with Egbuka too is that he went to a team that I don't think cares about sort of bringing in particular archetypes of wide receivers to play certain roles. And I say that because they drafted Jalen McMillan last year in the third round,
Yes,
and they didn't play him in the slot at all when he was a pure
exactly.
slot coming out of Washington. And so I think like, and not only that, if you look at Egbuka and how he performed on the perimeter in college, really good. He was like top
Yeah,
5 in the class in yards per route run on the outside. So like, I think Egbuka can still, number one, I think he can play both inside out, but I also think that they're going to play him on the outside because of Chris Godwin being there. And so with Godwin being there and having signed that deal and being older, he'll get sort of he'll be their number one go-to there in the slot. But yeah, I mean, like to me, the slot argument, because I've made that argument with some guys, but the some guys argument that I make it for is when they are only playing the slot. That matters because if they're not out there in 2 wide receiver sets, then they're not seeing the benefit of running a complement of routes. Like that's what's
Jaden
holding
Reed.
Jaden Reed back.
Yes,
Exactly. Like
yes.
that's what, like, we have to still care about it from that perspective. But when you have a player who can play an inside out and will play inside out, that's really, really attractive. That's what we've seen. Like, that's where CeeDee Lamb started to thrive and all the guys that you just named. Like, when they can play inside out, Keenan Allen's done that throughout his entire career. And
Exactly.
when they play both inside and out, that means that, okay, when you're in 12 personnel or 2 wide receiver sets, you're still on the field. You can get targeted. When you're in 3 wide receiver sets, 11 personnel, you'll be in the slot. You'll have an easier time against these like safeties and linebackers, and you will more than likely have a higher yards per out run out of that area of the field. So
Yep.
there's a lot of benefit as long as you are playing sort of in that base 12 as well.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. So I'm curious where we both start. I don't know exactly when you start to do that, but I'm basically just started this last week, putting my rookies into, excuse me, into my dynasty rankings. And I kind of pepper them in. It's funny too, because I take a couple at a time and I put them in. And I'm like, okay, I think that's where they go. Okay, some more. I don't put them all in at once. It's crazy. I'm a lunatic, but I think it's important to really get it right as to where you think these guys are, especially as we start to get into it's funny, the deeper you go into the off season, the rookie drafts sometimes change. I
Mhm.
like to stagger mine out in leagues that I commish. I mean, it feels like this is actually kind of late now. What are we, not even a month, whatever. It's like, it feels so late. But anyway, excuse me, I almost said Roma Dunze. Tet McMillan and Travis Hunter, compared to, let's just say, like, AJ Brown, T. Higgins, Marvin Harrison Jr., like players like that. I mean, Roma Dunze, if you want, but like, where do those guys fit in and around those players right now? Let's say we're in a startup. I know a lot of people are doing startups. What are your thoughts about Tet and Hunter amongst, let's start with maybe AJ Brown, ahead of
Yeah.
AJ Brown?
I have him ahead of AJ Brown.
Yeah.
But I am how I sort of like work my rankings is I look at it as, this is what I would generally do, but then I factor in market price too, because it's going to matter.
Yes.
Dynasty is all about having the value pillar, but also the production pillar. I think AJ Brown
Totally.
has the production pillar, of course, and he has that side, over a guy like Ted, over a guy like Travis Hunter. But I think that we're inching towards the end of the peak for AJ Brown, and I want to be cognizant of that, and be ahead of that more so that anyone who's consuming the rankings or looking at the rankings are aware that I might be a little bit lower, like 2 or 3 wide receiver spots or 1 or 2 wide receiver spots lower for a player like Brown, but I'm doing that because I'm aware that the market value could start to dip, because
By
that's
the
just where we're at in his career.
by the way, I'm looking at my rankings. I have Tet and Travis one spot ahead of AJ Brown. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. I mean, like, and I think that's about right.
yeah,
The only guy that you named that I do have ahead of the two, I still have Marvin Harrison Jr. ahead of both of them.
same.
And the main reason for that is, number one, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is a better prospect. So I have, that still matters to some degree, but similar to the argument that I made, about and against, I guess, Roma Dunze, we can't just like, all of a sudden say his rookie season doesn't matter because things were weird and he was a really good prospect. Well, number one, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s rookie season really wasn't that bad. Like his yards per out run was above, like in the 70th ish, 75th percentile. Like all the peripheral metrics, advanced metrics were still okay enough for Marvin Harrison Jr. They just weren't elite like we saw or like we've seen with like a Justin Jefferson or something like that after their rookie seasons. But if you look at like I always go back to the ZAP model and look at players and prospects who were, and I have a year 2 model as well, which really helps out with this. But I'll look back at prospects who had scores as high as Marvin Harrison Jr. did. And this goes all the way back to 2011. So I have a decent sized sample. And the players, he had a score of like 99 ish. And the players who were above the 98 mark, there was only one. It was Jerry Jeudy, who didn't give us a wide receiver 2 season across his first 3 years in the league. And Jeudy gave us 13 PPR points per game. It wasn't like he was completely tanked. And obviously the majority of those players who were in that range gave us a wide receiver 1 season. So I'm more than okay with saying, yeah, look, they deployed him in a really annoying way last year. Hopefully they learned from their mistakes. Arizona didn't do anything to add to that wide receiver room in the draft. They still just have Trey McBride. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. could easily, quote unquote, break out this year. And, all of a sudden we're looking at him as a top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty pretty comfortably. So I'll have him there. But the other guys, we already talked to Dunze, T Higgins, I think is due for a little bit of regression. So I'm not, gonna place him there. I don't mind T, but I just think Marvin Harrison Jr. is just more of a special talent.
I totally agree 1,000%. And that's kind of to my point is, if that's where we have Tet and Hunter, we're not necessarily saying that they're better than sort of anybody in last year's class when it comes to Ladd, Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., right? All those guys, even down to Marvin Harrison Jr. still ranked ahead of them. So that means that if you're on the clock at the 103, I guess you and I would be advocating trading for those types of players. Certainly even Marvin Harrison Jr. for the 103. I don't know that's a move I'm doing that much. I haven't done it.
I haven't done it, but yeah, I mean, hypothetically, yes. Like hypothetically, yes. I think a more interesting one, and maybe I'll get some heat for this, is Garrett Wilson compared to these guys. Because are you Garrett Wilson over them pretty comfortably?
Yeah. Dude, Garrett Wilson has been like a target earner of epic proportions over his early career. He's still very young, and a lot of people are burying him because of Justin Fields. DJ Moore had his best year ever with Justin Fields. So maybe it's like he locks onto one guy. There's only one guy to lock onto there anyway. Yeah. It could actually work this year for Garrett Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson's got a little bit unlucky with quarterback play for sure, to say the least. I don't love the quarterback play this year, but I'm buying back into Garrett Wilson as well. I'm with you 1,000%. I've got him right with this group, actually.
Yeah,
right with this group. Yeah,
that's what I was gonna say. I have them in the same tier with like a Garrett Wilson type, right?
Yes.
And so I think you could go either direction. I'm probably not as bullish as you are with Wilson. I think that like there is a chance that we are narrative streeting Garrett Wilson to a degree, right? Where we're making some excuses and we're doing, because if you look at like some of the peripherals, like realistically, and again, people are going to roll their eyes and get angry, but look at points per game, look at yards per route run, look at target share, look at the things that we care mostly about, and compare Garrett Wilson to Jalen Waddle, right? Like maybe this is more of an argument of Jalen Waddle being undervalued than Garrett Wilson being, not overvalued, but just, but that would be my argument against Wilson, and maybe going with one of the Tet or Travis Hunter types, is that like the way that I was, and this goes back to sort of the Roma Dunze discussion, but like the way that I think about Dynasty in general and like player evaluation in Dynasty is I'm just constantly thinking like, when is that tipping point going to hit where the market says to themselves, oh, we're done with this guy.
That's right.
And I have a fear that if it doesn't happen this year for Garrett Wilson, is he not going to be closer to where Chris Olave is at? Concussion issues aside, but like that would be my concern with Garrett Wilson.
Agree, 1,000%. Yeah, I agree 1,000% that his. If I'm not aggressively buying into Garrett Wilson, I have him there, but I agree with you 1,000%, because like if all of a sudden it's like kind of ugly there, it's like he's worth very little, because there's the upside or the future. Even though he's very young, people won't look to that. They won't be like, oh yeah, don't worry, next year. It's too many years in a row.
Yeah, it's been 3 years. Yeah, exactly.
It's too many. It's too many. So I agree 1,000%. You're better off storing value in a Tet McMillan. If Tet has a disappointing year, it'll be a lot like the Rome Odunze Marvin Harrison Jr. situation where you say, okay, no, that's his rookie year.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. So that would be the value type argument, right?
Yes.
But I think production wise, it's not, the same.
Yeah, we would agree there. Let me see here. Oh, man, I get into this situation where we talked about it. You just mentioned it with that tier of like the Caleb, RJ Harvey, Burden, Egbuka, and you sort of talked about the rebuild. How does the long-term value of a wide receiver factor into your decision to draft wide receivers and running backs and rookie drafts? Like for me, I keep talking about like this rookie class, this 2025 rookie class was supposed to be the running back class. Remember, everybody, dude, 2025 running back is going to be outstanding. You're going to be able to get your running back in 2025. And then all of a sudden you're on the 103 and you're taking Tet McMillan over TreVeyon Henderson. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, really, not if you're here for the running backs, I have a running back, it's like going to a burger joint and being like, just to get the Caesar salad. You're like, wait, whoa, no, we're at the burger joint. They've got a pretty good Caesar salad, but they have burgers here, And so TreVeyon Henderson is the cheeseburger, man. Just get him. Am I crazy?
I don't think you're crazy. No, my model really likes TreVeyon Henderson. Has him as like the pretty. I mean, I wouldn't say pretty clear RB3 just because like draft capital is going to matter more at the top of the draft, and Judkin's got decent draft capital, so they are at least semi close there. But the one thing I'll say with the wide receiver class versus the running back class is that I agree. Like we went into this draft and like the Zap model loves the running backs in this class. Even still, like even post, not getting the draft capital that we thought it would get, it still likes these running backs to a pretty decent degree. But I don't think that we should let that necessarily overshadow the fact that there are some good wide receivers in this class. It's just when I was doing my analysis pre-draft, and I think I tweeted about this too, I'm like, this wide receiver class just has no depth. Like I don't feel good about literally, and it played out for sure in the draft, but I feel good about 0 day 3 wide receivers. Like not even to the point, like maybe Jalen Royals just because he fell to the right spot where like if something happens to Rashee Rice, he can just step in and like be that dude or whatever. But like it's all landing spot based as opposed to talent based with some of these day 3 wide receivers. And it's not to say that I like fall in love with day 3 wide receivers every year, but we can usually find 1 or 2 that we're like, yeah, I'll throw a dart at that guy, in rookie drafts and stuff. It's just not happening. And I actually sent a newsletter out today. Actually, I think that we sent it out while we were recording this. And, the way that the Zap model works is it takes a score of a player and it'll categorize them into elite producers, weekly starters, flex plays, and there's 6 categories. And then it goes to bench warmers, waiver wire ads, and dart throws, right?
Right.
And so I look at elite producers, weekly starters, and flex plays in this class. If you look at it since 2011, this wide receiver class since 2011, this class, it had 4 elite producers, which is actually an above average number, but it only had 2 weekly starters when every other class had at least 4. And the majority of them had like 6 to 8 of the weekly starter group. Right. And so it's just a class that just doesn't really do it for me depth wise. But I do think that at the top, it's still strong enough to warrant, if you want to go Travis Hunter or Tet over TreVeyon, I think that's fine. But yeah, I mean, like,
it's fine. Of course it is.
If you prefer TreVeyon Henderson over one of those wide receivers, especially, if you're in a league that doesn't trade a lot and you need to go for need a little bit more, in that draft, go for it. Like I have no problem with that because he is a very, very good talent.
I guess it's funny because like I'll talk out of 2 sides of my mouth on this deal because I'm always like, you got to build just like you did in our league. You got to build around the wide receivers because that's going to anchor you to longer term production, steadier, more predictable, longer term production. I mean, I joked about the Egbuka versus RJ Harvey situation, which they go almost back to back. I go, dude, Emeka Egbuka will be 29 years old and catching 100 balls while RJ Harvey is a memory. You're like, oh, right. I remember that guy. That guy was cool. Legitimately is going to be how it goes. I guarantee you, not just because of the age, but even just the running back situation, it's so if you're looking for a long-term asset, Egbuka versus RJ Harvey or even Caleb Johnson, who I like, it's not close. You have to take Egbuka,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
But like
Agreed.
at the same time, it's like this is the running back class. I mean, you've got to also draft some running backs. Now, I'm with you that after you get past this sort of first, you got 5, 6, 7 wide receivers, however you sort of
Yeah,
put them. If you want to throw an eighth in there because you love one dude, fine, whatever. In that range, right? After the sort of the cliff in the mid second, I'm just hammering running backs until I'm down
same.
to my running back 20 to 25. And then
Yes.
maybe I'll glance and see if, a wide receiver that I kind of like has fallen to me in the 4th round.
Yeah, the only time that I'm really pivoting and like, going with wide receivers, I'll randomly take shot. Like I really like Jalen Noel as a prospect, so I'll
Yeah.
randomly throw a dart there. But I have the luxury of playing in a lot of leagues where I can diversify, and Kyle Williams too. Like I didn't
I love
mind
Kyle
Kyle
Williams.
Williams, and
He's my
so
wide receiver 8. I mean,
yeah,
he's that guy.
right. So sure, I'll go. And like I said, the only day 3 guy that I'm kind of remote would be like a Jalen Royals because of the
Yeah.
situation itself. But and then like it's really this year's class is just so strange because you have so many wide receivers that had really good draft capital and had really really crappy profiles or at least questionable profiles. Isaac
For
Tesla,
sure.
questionable profile.
Very questionable.
Pat Bryant, who I actually wrote up as like a sleeper in the class in my pre-draft version of the guide. I never thought in a million years that Pat Bryant would be a day 2 pick.
Right, exactly.
Never.
Right.
But the thing is, when those guys fall to, I mean, I've gotten round 4 Pat Bryant plenty, right?
Smashed.
And so
Yeah.
like in situations like that, I'll get those guys. But yeah,
Yes.
otherwise it is just backup running backs and, the Ollie Gordon types and just throwing darts at these guys to literally all of them too. Like I don't really,
Yeah.
I mean, I have some preferences, but I'm really trying to spread it out because I think there's a lot of backs that could hypothetically hit, out of this class. Because like I said, the model and myself seem to like them more than the NFL did.
Yeah, and while let's say that I'm going to make this up. Let's say you much prefer Devin Neal over Ollie Gordon,
Right.
but the model and you and I don't know that Achan's going to get hurt and not Kamara or whatever.
Right.
It doesn't know
But
which
yeah,
one.
right. What you're saying here, though, is that like both of them have a low probability outcome. And even if that low probability outcome is doubly as good for Devin Neal as it is Ollie Gordon, you're saying, okay, it's going to be an 8% to 12% chance that XYZ happens, right? But that 8% and 12% is based purely on talent alone, right? And we know that situation is going to drive so much of this. So like you said, we don't know if Achan's going to get hurt, if Alvin Kamara is going to get hurt. Like we have no idea which direction that's going to go in. So we might as well kind of spread things out a little bit and not get too honed in. There's only maybe one guy that in the past round 2 at running back that I am getting kind of honed in and drafting a lot of this year.
Tell us who you love.
I feel like, look, when I went on shows pre-draft, there was always the question of like who my favorite sleeper in the class was. And I answered the same guy every single time. It was Jarquez Hunter. I love Jarquez Hunter as a talent, as a prospect. He was top 10, in yards after contact per attempt and explosive run rate in this class. He had a really good speed score. And then the landing spot, I think he's been steamed up a little bit for, people like myself and others who have just been pumping him up a little bit. But like the landing spot to me is kind of awesome where, you don't get as many, you don't necessarily get this. You will never get a very clear path for a day 3 running back in general. Like, I mean, every once in a while we get like Dameon Pierce or something like that, where like, okay, he can be the starter. Maybe you can flip him after the first year and you're good to go. But very rarely are you going to get this like, oh, he's going to be the day 1 starter on this team, right? And so you have to think a little bit outside the box and think about what's going to happen in the future. You could not have found, in my opinion, a better landing spot for Jarquez Hunter in particular, because if you look at what Sean McVay does, he's already shown us that he'll use a slightly undersized running back in a bell cow role. So that's great. He's also shown us that that coaching tree in general, they rotate running backs usually by drive and not by down and distance because they want the defense to be kept honest, right? That's why they drafted Blake Corum last year, because they wanted him to spell Kyren Williams. I think in an ideal world, they would want Blake Corum to, Kyren Williams have 2 drives or 3 drives and then Blake Corum come in for a drive. And they started to do that down the stretch a little bit until Blake Corum got hurt. But I think that's what they like envisioned when they made the Blake Corum pick last year. And then you look at Jarquez Hunter, very similar size profile to those guys. Kyren Williams had a better receiving profile than Jarquez Hunter. Yep. Blake Corum had a crappier receiving profile than Jarquez Hunter. But the one thing that stands out with Hunter is that he's far, far more explosive than both of those players. And they have not had that explosiveness out of the backfield, with Corum, with Kyron Williams. I have a metric called breakout score in the ZAP model, which this year at running back, I switched it from using total yards per team play to receiving yards per team pass attempt. So my running back model doesn't use any rushing metrics anymore. It's all receiving metrics. And so the breakout score at running back is receiving yards per team pass attempt adjusted for age and adjusted for strength of schedule. And Jarquez Hunter had one of the best breakout scores in this class. Like if you look at what he did as a receiver in college, it wasn't that they used him a ton. He had like a best season 11% reception share. But what they did, but when he did get the rock, he was really, really effective from a yardage perspective as a receiver. Very similar to like a Kenneth Walker and what we saw with Walker coming out of college. So like not to say that's not his comp. It's just that, that deployment and how he was used as a receiver was very similar. So
you're not going to get too much pushback from me. Keep going if you will.
I think Hunter could be like Kyron Williams, a free agent next year. Kyron Williams dropped off from 2023 to 2024. Like he did not have the same type of season from an efficiency perspective. Kyron Williams is an incredibly fragile fantasy asset from the standpoint of he is so volume dependent that if they mix that up even a little bit, that's gonna make Kyron fall, but then obviously someone else in that backfield be elevated. And I would rather bet right now on Jarquez Hunter being that guy than Blake Corum, because I think in a vacuum, Jarquez Hunter is the better prospect than Blake Corum is.
I love all this. So pre-NFL draft, we had, I say we, basically me, but kind of we, because we did the Dynasty Underground show, and it's me, Travis, and Joe. So at least me, Travis, and Joe is we. That's a we. I had the top 5 of Caleb, Caleb Johnson, Quinshawn, TreVeyon, Genty, and Hampton. Okay, great. Top 5. After that, I had RJ Harvey at 6. God bless me. We had Skattebo 7, Jarquez Hunter at 8, Bhayshul Tuten 9. Like we had these guys in the top, man. These guys are so good. We love Jarquez Hunter. By the way, did not start there. If I look at my first one, I just put the guys in. This wasn't even rankings. It was just me sort of looking at where I thought they were based off of the public consensus. Jarquez Hunter's like 22nd or something like that. I scouted down the list and I was like, wait, why is Jarquez Hunter so fucking good? Why is he so good? Dude, you look at career 15-yard run rate, 15-yard run rate. He is second in the class behind RJ Harvey. It's like, dude, these guys are great. The other guys on that list that basically clear a certain amount, Ashton Genty, TreVeyon Henderson, RJ Harvey, Bhayshul Tuten, and Jarquez Hunter. Those are the highest in career 15-yard run rate. You want to talk about missed tackles forced per rush. Genty clears, Drew. Unbelievable. But Cam Skattebo, RJ Harvey, Bhayshul Tuten, and Jarquez Hunter. These guys are breaking tackles and ripping big runs. They're athletic. You look at yards per rush. I mean, not a perfect metric, but certainly not one that's bad to be good at. The best in the class, Ashton Genty, TreVeyon Henderson, RJ Harvey, and Jarquez Hunter. Unbelievable. These guys are really good. I loved everywhere you looked with them. And yes, Jarquez Hunter didn't exactly have the best yards per route run stuff. I mean, it wasn't great, but it also wasn't that bad. I mean, he was right up there with like Devin Neal, Ollie Gordon, Caleb Johnson, and yards per route run. Like, it was fine. Just not great, but also, like you say, when you look at some of the other metrics, it actually turns around a little bit for him. He has 68 career receptions, was pretty good, 8.2 yards per reception. Nothing great on the receiving side, but dude, I absolutely loved Jarquez Hunter, and I think he is a really good running back. I remember watching the film too. I'd be like, just kind of like, wow, this guy must be good. Let's see. And yeah, he just moves really well. He's an SEC back that did all of that in the SEC. It's not like you could even say RJ Harvey, although RJ Harvey's strength of schedule was a lot better than people give it credit for. But yeah, he didn't do it against a bunch of schlubs. It wasn't like his team was the best team in the SEC either. So it wasn't like he had some sort of advantage with his team. It wasn't like, oh, he played for Alabama, they just crushed everybody. His team was not, middling, I guess. Is that I'm not a college football expert, but I don't think they were that special. All that to say, I'm with you. I
Yeah.
love Jarquez Hunter, brother.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like when I've seen folks, and I have had conversations with folks about how he's been steamed up a little bit, in
Yeah,
rookie drafts and stuff. But when we go back to our conversation about late seconds and into the third, especially in like a single quarterback league, non-tight end premium, like
yeah,
I think that he could be easily a late second pick. Like
yes,
like
for sure.
in that kind of environment where like who else like what's your alternative there? Like
Yeah,
are you
what else
gonna
are you trying to do? Right.
yeah, are you going to force the issue with another like a Pat Bryant because he's a day 3 or sorry, a day 2 wide receiver?
Yeah,
Like,
no, thank you.
like not only that, but like at least with like a Bhayshul Tuten and with a Jarquez Hunter, they had pretty good draft capital and all. I know that we label things day 1, day 2, day 3, and I'm guilty of this too because I do
Yeah,
it to make it more consumable for people to sort of comprehend and understand whenever I'm podcasting about it. But like Bhayshul Tuten had 104th overall draft capital, which some years would be a day 2 pick just based
right,
on comp picks and stuff.
right.
And so like it just, the model that I'm working with is looking at overall raw draft capital. It's not looking at,
Yeah,
this
104, right.
delineation that
Yes.
this wall that just hits whenever you hit day 3. When you get into like round 5, yeah, of course, there's not going to be that dramatic of a difference between like a mid round 5 pick and a mid round 7 pick. But like when you're talking about the early portions and mid portions of round 4, that's still not bad draft capital either.
And honestly, it's really opportunity at the running back position. If a guy's good and when they get into camp, it's obviously going to be those 3 guys. If he's the best one, McVay has proven that he's unafraid
Yeah.
to elevate whom he thinks is the best back. He did it with Cam Akers. He did it with Kyron Williams. He's
Yeah.
just not afraid. He did that to us. Remember Kyron before that season? He was like the 70th running back in Dynasty or something. He's off
Yeah.
the board, and then just was like top 10. Like
Yeah.
he does it every time. So there's no telling that he won't do it again. I'm with you 1,000%. For me, it's like Devin Neal. I think he's going to be above Kendre Miller. We can certainly
Yeah, I love
project,
Devin Neal. Yeah.
right? We can project that at this point. And then we understand that Kamara, as great as he is probably, especially given the transition of this team, is probably not going to be a workhorse. Like
Right.
there's going to be some opportunities for somebody else on the ground. DJ Giddens is probably the best, highest upside handcuff in the NFL. Like he's got immense upside because he's super gifted and athletic. If he does get on the field, if JT were to suffer some sort of injury that kept him out multiple games, I'm not saying he will, but he has the upside to become a huge upside play. And here's the difference. Any of these guys, you can go down to Ollie Gordon, even Damian Martinez, who I know is sort of needs a couple things to happen, but you can go all the way up and down all these running backs, right? Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, who I'd never heard of until a couple weeks ago. Like, look, I don't know. It's like I just.
Well, he wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't
like,
invited
what
to
are
the
we
combine. Yeah.
right? I'm
Yeah.
like, what is going on? Anyway, so but like now I'm pushing the button on this guy. Like, yes, why? Because a running back who gets elevated to chair 1 or chair 2 with benefits in the NFL is now going to be producing for your fantasy roster, where that's not the case for a wide receiver who gets put into action. I went on Heath's show this morning. I mentioned, I think it was Jacob Cowing played a few last year. He got starter. He was like in there. Nobody noticed.
Mhm.
Nobody cared. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. There's wide receivers who will get thrust into action and not get targeted, period. It happens all the time. You don't get to play the running back position and not get the ball.
Right, exactly. And this is why I always talk about how wide receiver is more of a talent driven position because you have to get open. You have to, obviously scheme is going to play a role. Quarterback play will play a role, but you have to get open in order to see the volume that you want your wide receiver to see. Whereas running backs just have to beat their depth chart and get on the field, and the coach says, hand him the ball. Right? Like how many bad running backs, like objectively bad running backs, have we
Carson
say
Steele.
bad? Obviously they're better than like us, and they're better than the majority of human beings on the planet. But how many just like mediocre running backs have we seen get the ball often, right? In their offense. Like think about like Sean Green seeing as many touches as he saw in the NFL and such. And it just comes down to a coaching decision at the end of the day. And
Yes.
obviously you have to hope and cross your fingers that your talent evaluation matches up with what the coach's talent evaluation says, and that they want to elevate that player to a point where they want to give him a lot of reps. But yeah, I mean, like these guys, if an injury occurs or whatever, if they're the dude, they're the dude. And if they have a good backbone of being talented and good, which so many running backs in this class do, then they have an opportunity to really make a splash in fantasy football, which is why I'm just throwing those darts like crazy in round 3 to 5 in these rookie drafts.
Look at all the San Francisco running backs, Isaac Guerrero, Jordan Mason. Shit, we were making trades for Patrick Taylor, Carson Steele, right? All these guys that, excuse me, got a chance to play. Sean Tucker. Sean Tucker was the RB3. Looked like he was like the RB1 one week. I mean, these guys have the opportunity to go out there and perform. And, when they do, like you said, Dameon Pierce is a great example. As soon as he was given the opportunity, people traded first round picks for Dameon Pierce. That happened. It doesn't happen as much at the wide receiver, especially when a guy doesn't stick. Yeah. So you could say, oh yeah, people traded a first round pick for Puka. Puka's still a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. Like, he's really good. The talent is why he was good, not the opportunity. But the opportunity for those running backs will get you profit. So if you're picking late thirds and fourth round picks, pick a running back who, of course he might crap out. We understand that thoroughly. As a matter of fact, he probably will crap out. But if he gets elevated, you can't have a better ROI than those running backs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, it's all about that perspective, because the talent side of the equation is when you get that long lasting value, like Bucky Irving being a quote day 3 pick last year. I mean, I certainly didn't think he was going to be this talented at the NFL level, but he was such an outlier from a talent perspective with that kind of draft capital, that it would be silly to bucket him with a player like Dameon Pierce, right? And what Dameon Pierce did. And so,
that's right.
So like the talent is going to be able to give that player long-standing value. But like, think of James Robinson. Remember when James Robinson had his rookie year as an undrafted guy? And look, he had a really intriguing production profile in college. I loved him as a prospect coming out that year. But it was very obvious that like that kind of player is a UDFA who didn't necessarily do anything like overly special. That wasn't going to be a long lasting thing. Now, he had the injury that occurred, and maybe that that definitely did derail his career. But we see examples of that happen all the time, right? But talent at the end of the day is going to give you that long lasting value. But with the running back position, there can be a lack of talent to give you that short term value where you can either profit and turn them and flip them and get something in return, or just use them for a couple weeks and get more production in your fantasy lineup.
Totally. I know you're a big Bhayshul Tuten fan. I think you liked him going in. Your model liked him going in, and even coming out after being an early, what was he, 4th round pick, right?
Yeah.
But the 104, like you point out, which I, by the way, also not afraid of any of that. But my question, I guess, about Tuten is, does the Bigsby Etienne backfield scare you at all with Tuten? I mean,
not totally. I mean, of course, it's not a super crisp situation, but I think that you could make the argument that a player like Quinshon Judkins, a player like TreVeyon Henderson, in the short term, have something in their way as well, right? Yeah. Where Quinshon Judkins has Jerome Ford to deal with, and they also drafted Dylan Sampson. TreVeyon Henderson still has Ramondre Stevenson to deal with, which I obviously am going to bet on the talent in those situations, especially the TreVeyon situation. He does something differently than what Ramondre does. But I look at Bigsby and Etienne, and I don't see players that Tuten can't overcome in his backfield. Not only that, anytime there's a coaching staff change and they aren't tied to the existing players, and I'm not going to feel the need to be super tied to those existing players either. And they made an action, and that action was, we're going to get Bhayshul Tuten. And to me, Tuten is a very, very good prospect, at least from the perspective of like what we look for in fantasy football. He had strong pass catching numbers when he was at North Carolina A&T, but then those continued when he went to Virginia Tech as well. Obviously, he had the speed score. His top comp in the ZAP model was Kenneth Walker. So that's obviously not a bad thing. He scored even with his draft capital. He scored really comparably to like him and Caleb Johnson and RJ Harvey in the ZAP model were all clumped together. So I've seen the take that like, Jarquez Hunter is the arbitrage play to Bhayshul Tuten, which is the idea that you're not going to get that production from that player until 2026, right? But my argument is, I think Bhayshul Tuten is just really, really good. Yeah. And if he's really good and undeniable on a team with a new coaching staff, they're not going to really care about what they already have on that team if he's going to help them win football games. I also think there's a non-zero chance that Travis Etienne gets dealt before the season starts. Totally. So if that happens, and like, think of it this way, if Travis Etienne weren't on that team, okay, where do you think Bhayshul, like would Bhayshul Tuten, maybe he wouldn't get drafted as high as Caleb Johnson, but probably close-ish in rookie drafts, right? Yeah. Like because there would be that more immediate opportunity. And if that's the case, I don't want Travis Etienne to be the reason that I'm not getting Bhayshul Tuten.
Yeah. I think the market has steamed him pretty well, which is
Yeah,
like to
I would
that,
agree. Yeah.
right? To that RB, 6-7-ish.
Yeah.
Right now it's him and Cam Skattebo. Excuse me. I think Skattebo is a little bit more of a, if you need production in right now, you're like kind of hoping to hit something hit the ground running with it. Like you're going to play one of these guys in your RB2 slot for a team that's competitive. It's like, give me Cam Skattebo. Let's go, buddy.
Yeah.
But if I'm looking, for maximum upside ceiling, Tuten's there. Little note on Bhayshul Tuten. Um, I do. First of all, like I said, we looked at the missed tackles forced per rush. He is right there with Cam Skattebo. Actually, 36.8%. I mean, he's 36.3. So it's basically Genty, Skattebo, then Tuten. If you look to final season, he's also still third. One of the things I look at, JJ, that I think if you remember, Noah Hills did this to a great degree. He would look at box counts and basically look at how running backs performed in their offense versus other running backs in their offense.
Yeah.
And I used to love that work, and I did not do that work. I did a very, very small amount of that work. I just basically took raw yards per rush from this back versus the yards per rush of all the other backs in their on their team. That does obviously say, well, if you played with better backs, that difference might be, skewed. Of course, I get that. I didn't do all that work like Noah did. But in this class, Bhayshul Tuten had 6.3 yards per rush. The rest of the running backs on his team were 4.5. That was 1.8 yards better per rush. The only player better than that, ironically, was TreVeyon Henderson. Ouch, Judkins. But so Bhayshul Tuten was basically best in class at yards per rush over his level of competition. You're right, man. He wasn't exactly a huge pass catcher with only 50 career catches, but he was 1.29 yards per route run. So they didn't really ask him to do it that much. I asked a ton of people, JJ, leading up to the draft because I kept looking at all these numbers. I was like, dude, this guy's kind of dope, isn't he?
Yeah.
And I'd have like a lot of film guys, college guys, and I said, hey, all this is dope, but yet his PFF offensive grade was like one of the worst, like 77. Like, why? What am I missing? There were two things that came up. One was ball security, which is like, okay, so if he just stops doing that, stops fumbling, that's kind of cool. Like maybe stop doing that, Bhayshul. And the other one was a lot of decision making. Maybe not a technician, at the line of scrimmage. He's not Kyron Williams, right? This type of player. And I was sort of getting the, is this Izzy Abanikanda again? Please don't do it to me, Lord. I remember liking Izzy at one point.
Yeah.
I don't think it is, but I'm just saying there's a little bit of a cautionary tale there. However, him going to that offense gives him the opportunity to be a little bit more of a space player at first. Maybe they can teach him those other things that he was, why he fell to the fourth round.
I think he pairs nicely with Tank Bigsby as a tandem, right?
Yep.
And like, I understand the argument of like a Cam Skattebo over Tuten for like 2025. I would agree. Like his projection looks better than Tuten. The way that I kind of look at that scenario and that situation though is I don't know if Cam Skattebo is going to be a like league winning player to begin with, or like a, like even an RB2, like a true RB2 in fantasy. Like he certainly won't project that way. I still think Tyrone Tracy is not a bad player. And I think that he too is a good tandem with Skattebo there. And so my point would be that if you like the talent of Tuten better than Skattebo, which I personally do, Skattebo looked really good from a production standpoint, all that, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't worried about the explosive run rate and the speed score aspect, especially when you adjust for pro day, all that kind of stuff. So if you take a small hit in year one for the better long-term future, and that small hit is probably not going to be so significant to begin with, just because we're talking about like lesser numbers in general at first anyway. That's why I cleanly have Tuten one tier ahead of Skattebo instead of having them in the same tier.
Yeah, and that's fair. Skattebo does have a better career 15-yard run rate than Quinshon Judkins and Omarion Hampton and Devin Neal and Ollie Gordon and Dylan Sampson. Yeah. But we got to give him some credit. I found myself just kept coming around on Skattebo like being like, wait a minute, if this guy weren't white, would he be more
Yeah.
liked?
I like him. Yeah.
I
I still
honestly
like
think he
him.
would be,
Yeah.
by the way. I really do believe there's a little bit of whitewashing we give to that prospect. You know, we joke about on the underground all the time. Like we'll compare him. Like my number one comp for Skattebo was Theo Greminger. You know what I mean? I was like, he plays so much like Theo Greminger. We used to always just joke about like any white guy will
Funny.
do as a comp. It's so funny. But like seriously, like, you know, his athletic comp and size comp is like Josh Jacobs. I mean, he ran a very similar 40. He's very similar in size to Josh Jacobs. Like, you know, so Skattebo, dude, he was 1.58 yards per route run, which is, I think, actually,
He has
it's like
he has the
fourth.
second.
You know?
Yeah, he has the second best production profile in this class behind Genty, in my opinion. Like
Right?
the production profile. Like I like Skattebo. Don't take any of that the wrong way. I just really like Bhayshul Tuten. Like
Sure.
because when I look at what makes that like ceiling outcome hit for a running back in the NFL, it usually has more explosiveness than what
Sure.
a Cam Skattebo is going to bring to the table. I think Skattebo's high end outcome is like Kareem Hunt, which, you know, that's actually his top comp in the Zap
Yeah,
model,
fair.
which is a fine outcome
Yeah.
to have. We would love a Kareem Hunt type outcome, but with Bhayshul Tuten, it's like if things click and really hit for him, I think the ceiling is a lot higher for him than
Yeah,
Skattebo.
I don't disagree with that. I think, first of all, Cam has goal line. Like, he's a true goal line technician.
Yeah.
He's a tackle breaker mauler who, look, I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be like physically advantageous over NFL perimeter players. That's not what
Right.
I'm saying. I'm saying that he was physically advantageous at the college level, which will give him some juice at the next level breaking tackles. I mean, he's not going to be, you know, we're not talking Jim Brown here, but I'm just saying he's a good tackle breaker. On
Yep.
top of which, so touchdown upside plus pass grade, you know, all the pass stuff, like he was 12.9 yards per reception for his career.
He had a best season prorated reception share of 20.7%, which is like unheard of, especially for
Unheard
a
of.
219-pound back. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of archetype I generally am like totally fine with. So I am totally fine with Skattebo for sure.
Yeah, I just think it's important to point out because we like both players,
Yeah.
and either one of them could fall flat on their face. We've seen this
Yeah.
many a time. So I'm not like planting any flags on either of these guys, but I think they're both absolutely fantastic picks at the wall, the mid second wall. Like I'm so delighted to pick them at 2.7, 2.8, 2.9.
Yep.
I guess we'll finish on this. I wanted to ask how you're playing the quarterback position. Maybe we can touch on some more running backs. We could talk about them all day. Like one more actually. Jaydon Blue has to be mentioned. Actually, we have to. I can't move on until we get to Jaydon Blue. Jaydon Blue is interesting because he's analytically not so good, but yet athletically tremendous. The film guys don't necessarily love him because he had one of the highest fumble rates ever recorded. Like, I mean, this guy fumbled more than he caught passes, I think. I'm not even sure. It's like, we got to go look. But, like, unbelievable. Yet, he lands in Dallas. The star is going to be on the helmet. And the running back room is as thin as Cottonelle. So, what do we make of Jaydon Blue and his opportunity there in Dallas?
Yeah, I mean, look, you mentioned that, you know, the analytics aren't that strong for him, but my model looks only at receiving stuff, and he actually looks really good in the Zap model. And so, yeah, there's definitely concerns from the standpoint of, you know, if you look at his weight and you look at the 3 sub 200-pound backs drafted after pick 100 since 2011, you get you only get 3 of them. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. Only 3 of the players, that was really poorly phrased. Only 3 running backs that were sub 200 pounds drafted past pick 100 since 2011 have hit a 50% running back rush share in their first 3 seasons in the NFL. And those 3 were Kyren Williams, Andre Ellington, and Bucky Irving. Now, you look at their profiles in college, Ellington had over 600 career rushes. Irving was at 475. Kyren Williams, 419. Jaydon Blue is at 214. So he's far below. But then you start to build the narrative a little bit. He's playing at Texas with some studly running backs there with him. So obviously he wasn't going to necessarily play ahead of, you know, the guys that were there. You know, even though last year he also didn't see as much work, but his breakout score, which is adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt for strength of schedule and for age, really strong. You know, we're seeing some teams be more and more open to using these guys in a more high volume capacity to some degree. And you look at the backfield and you're like, all right, Javonte Williams, probably a Jag, you know, Miles Sanders, definitely a Jag.
Definitely.
And then, you know, Phil Maffa is at the very least not a receiving back whatsoever. I mean,
At
his
all.
kind of profile is one that busts like crazy at the NFL level. I mean, it's just not a profile that I generally am going to buy into. Maybe you could make the LeGarrette Blount argument, for Phil Maffa, but that's the extent that I would go, and that's the ceiling that I would go with a guy like Maffa. So I'm looking at Jaydon Blue, and I'm saying to myself, okay, his like realistic comp is probably like a Justice Hill, right? And if you get a Justice Hill outcome in an offense that doesn't have any sort of real complement, and that team is willing to give him some work, I could see an outcome where he's at least an RB3 in fantasy and PPR. So like that's where I would go with Blue. I'm not going to be like Matt, like I have him in a tier with Jarquez Hunter, right? So like I could, and I Hunter ahead of him.
Yes.
And this was post draft too. I probably would even elevate Hunter even a little bit more because the sentiment is a little bit better now with Hunter. But I'm drafting Hunter instead of Jaydon Blue. But I actually don't, and this is not the kind of player that I generally will go after because of the size profile. But I don't mind throwing that dart in round 3 and seeing if Dallas just ends up using him a little bit more than we think. This is not Deuce Vaughn. He's like 30 pounds heavier than Deuce Vaughn.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I'm okay with at least taking that chance because the Zap model actually likes him a decent bit.
But by the way, if you added 45 or 60 pounds to Deuce Vaughn, he would have had the greatest profile of all time,
ever,
by the way.
Ever. Yes.
Ever. Period.
He has the best. He has like the best production profile you will ever find
of all time. Yes. He's the greatest player ever. If he were only between 50 and 100 pounds more. Somewhere there. Anyway, the other thing that has to be mentioned about Jaydon Blue is the sort of vividness of him succeeding in Dallas. As soon as that happens, there's a lot of buzz. Everybody, he's going to be very popular as the guys over at Destination Devy say, the ADF or whatever. I screw it up every time, but the artificial dynasty value, ADV. Sorry, I mess up the A and the V and the V and the F and all this stuff. But anyway, that artificial dynasty value is real. In other words, it has nothing to do with production or anything. It's just like Shedeur Sanders right now. Like, if Shedeur hits, it's going to be it's all over the news, the whole thing. He's going to be very valuable. Whereas if Shuggs succeeds, they'll be like, doesn't he suck though? I'm pretty sure he sucks, right? So those are the types of things. And I think with Jaydon Blue, that's going to be super strong. If he gets on the field, it's going to be like, everybody needs to have him. So he's worth a pick for sure.
He's also electric. Like he's got a crazy good speed score. He's really good with the ball in his hands at the very least. You get him in space, he's going to make some splash and crazy plays. And that alone can elevate. I mean, look what happened with Keaton freaking Mitchell, right? Yes. Like Keaton Mitchell had a really bad production profile, was also undersized, but he could take anything to the house. Like immediately.
Took a couple to the house and everybody wanted him.
That's right. But you knew that, I mean, I understand the injury derailed things, but you knew that a player like that wasn't ever going to be more than likely a bell cow in that kind of backfield, right? Absolutely not, but right. You're in a position now in Dallas where like, this is a scenario where Jaydon Blue could see 100 rush attempts this year, right? Easily. And maybe a 10% target share. And maybe it's 0. I mean, of course.
Exactly. That's also possible. Yes.
But if that happens, you're throwing this is a 3rd round pick in rookie drafts. And it doesn't matter. Like the fact that that's a realistic outcome is good enough to buy into, in my opinion. Because if you do get that kind of usage in year 1 with his explosive ability, his value is going to rise pretty dramatically.
I think he actually is a great pick for that reason, that there will be, or could potentially be, almost probably will be a moment during the 2025 season where you can flip Jaydon Blue for a future first. Like, not in every league, but I think there'll be at least that much sort of steam, or he'll have a couple of big plays, or, all he needs is like 12 carries in one game and take 170 yards for a touchdown. People will be like, that's it. He's the next guy for sure.
Yeah, at the very least, I think he's the kind of player that you're going to be able to profit off of and spend a 3rd this year and get a 2nd next year for him. And at least get that production, if you need like a flex or something like that this year. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's kind of the story to be told on a lot of these backs. The Devin Neals, the DJ Giddens, all the guys that we've just talked about. One more. I do have a question. By the way, your Brashard Smith take should just be the same exact one that you had on Isaiah Pacheco, and then you can just win no matter what happens, right? Whether it's Brashard or Pacheco, what do you think? Just do it.
I liked Brashard Smith. The reason I wasn't on Pacheco when he came out was because he comped to Damian Williams, and Damian Williams had just found really good success in in Kansas City. And I'm like,
Yeah.
sure, I'll make that comparison. Look, I liked Brashard Smith as a prospect because I always like the tweeners and the guys who convert from I like the guys who go from wide receiver to running back versus the opposite. But like,
Right.
you know, like I wasn't like really into like a Curtis Samuel type, let's say, but like the guys who are going, you know, like Tyrone Tracy, I loved last year. A lot of
Antonio
that's just because
Gibson. I like
receiving
Gibson.
matters so much. And he's like a smaller Tyrone Tracy, you know, not as
Yeah.
old. So maybe we can give him a little bit of a bump there for that. But yeah, look, I like Smith. He had a really good production his year last year as running back and at running back. My thing with him though is that like I think that the Chiefs probably see him more as like a fun gadgety guy that maybe they would have loved Kadarius Toney to be this kind of player.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so and Andy Reid's a really creative and fun, you know, head coach. I just don't know if he's going to have like the high volume outcome that we would want him to have.
Last one, and then we'll move to the quarterback real quick before we end, is the Dylan Sampson situation. I have TreVeyon clearly ahead of Quinshon. I see the Quinshon floor take, which is that, you know, he's just going to see 200 plus carries and like he's going to be utilized. I get, okay, great. But man, oh man, they just took two backs, right? They just took two running backs in the same draft class, meaning this sort of regime, this head coach, general manager, the whole thing, right? The infrastructure that is currently in power in Cleveland just invested two picks. They don't necessarily have more or less love for one or the other, only insofar as they spent more on one, which gives him the upper hand. But what if it's like Dylan Sampson just better? I don't think he is or anything, but what are the odds that Dylan Sampson carves out, let's just say, a 50-50 role with Quinshon Judkins in year one? It's possible.
I think the draft told us, and the NFL told us what they think of Dylan Sampson generally, because Sampson was a projected day 2 guy by like NFL mock draft database and stuff.
Yep.
And then he goes day 3, you know, probably later than a lot of people expected him to go. This is where the Zap model thought he should go, essentially, based on the fact that he had a sub 10% best season reception share. He had a poor breakout score. That's all based on receiving, like I've been saying. He had a poor total yards per team play rate versus the rest of the class. It was below average. He had a worse than average yards after contact per attempt rate over his career. And he was pretty average at avoiding tackles as well. The one thing that Dylan Sampson does well is create explosive plays. He's good in short yardage, actually, too. He was surprisingly good there.
Although his 15-yard run rate for his career was not all that good. It was below average. It was,
which is interesting. Yeah.
It's a 15-yard run rate is 7.3% of the time. You know, that's below Genty, TreVeyon, Caleb, Omarion, Judkins, Skattebo, Devin Neal, Ollie Gordon, RJ Harvey, DJ Giddens, Bhayshul Tuten, Damian Martinez, Brashard Smith, Trevor Etienne, Marcus Yarns, like, shall I keep going? Jarquez Hunter, of course. Like, you know, he was only really better at that than like LaQuint Allen, Jordan James, Raheem Sanders, like Taj Brooks. Like, that was where the bucket he fell in terms of 15-yard run rate for his career. That's the thing, is like, when I was told about Dylan Sampson, everybody was like, oh, dude, explosive player. I'm like, cool, let's check it out. Wait, where's all the explosive runs? I mean, you know, it just wasn't there. He's 1.09 yards per route run, only 40 career catches. Didn't really make that many big plays, or excuse me, his average yards per reception, 8.6 yards per reception. Yeah, man, he left me wanting more. And here's another one. Like, you could say maybe the blocking, this, that, the other. His 10-yard runs that turned into 15-yard runs, which is what I looked at. Sometimes you're like, you know who dominated there was Caleb Johnson, one of the best, which makes sense, right? Who's so dominant at the second level.
Yeah, who gets that once he gets going, he can get going.
Good luck stopping that dude. Yeah. Well, Dylan Sampson was one of the lower, only 47%. Were like the leader, Caleb Johnson, 67%. You know,
it's not surprising though, because he's a smaller running back who, you know, to me, and I said this on my show, where I would have been more concerned with Quinshon Judkins being paired with Jaydon Blue than I would with Dylan Sampson, because Judkins, his biggest question mark is what he's going to do as a receiver. I think that his like ceiling outcome from like a usage perspective is like a Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor, where it's like, maybe you have a season of a 10% target share, because that's what we've seen historically with this kind of profile. But there's at least a better long-term chance now that Dylan Sampson being there, not being a pass catcher. Of course, they've used Jerome Ford in that role, and he'll be there, here in year one for Quinshon Judkins. But to me, it helped Judkins to some degree because this team clearly is going to have some sort of backup, some sort of tandem to run with him. You look at their depth chart; they would be empty at running back if they wouldn't have used the pick on Dylan Sampson. So now you have just a clear change of pace back, which is what Dylan Sampson is. Like size wise, profile wise, a good explosive, or can be explosive just based on his speed.
Supposedly explosive.
Yeah, right. Change of pace back to pair with Quinshon Judkins, who is the belt, not we'll say workhorse, because we don't know what the receiving upside is going to really look like. But I think the receiving upside for Judkins now looks actually a little bit more favorable since they got Sampson and not a guy like a Brashard Smith or Jaydon Blue or these guys who we know would be able to play a receiving role out of the backfield.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk quarterbacks real quick, and then we'll send you home. I've been workshopping some ideas. I was in on Jackson Dart. I was asking the question, why is Jackson Dart being overlooked? Literally last year, I had Felix like last off season because I wasn't sure. I was like, what's up with Jackson Dart to Felix Sharp? He's like, I don't know much about him. Like, whatever. This was 2 years ago. I don't know much about him, but I don't have a take. Been asking this question pretty, sustainingly. And here we are. And now I think he's obviously clearly the quarterback 2 in this class. He's got some people who love him, some people who hate him. But I guess what I would ask is, how are you sort of approaching this quarterback class? Are you just avoiding at all costs? I found myself avoiding for the most part and just picking a different position because the quarterback class is a little bit weak. I'm wondering if I'm starting to regret that a little bit. What are your thoughts about how you approach the quarterback class in this draft?
Yeah, so look, I got Cam Ward. I got a share of Cam Ward, for instance, at like 104, 105, because it was a quarterback needy team. I'm like, yeah, I think he's in that tier just from the perspective of like, first overall pick, etc. With Jackson Dart, I've gotten him as well when he's fallen into the early parts of round 2 in Superflex drafts, like not infrequently. And to me, I'm going to look, with quarterbacks, I don't even prospect them because it's a really, really difficult position to really know, and so much is going on between the ears that we have no idea. But the folks like Jim Sonis is someone who I worked with at FanDuel, and I've been friends with him for a decade now, and I bring him on my show every year because he has a quarterback model that he uses. And last year he was on top of the Jaden Daniels stuff. Like he's done a very, very good job with this model, and his model had Cam Ward and Jackson Dart pre-drafts. This is without draft capital involved. But pre-draft had them as like top 10 quarterback prospects over the last 10 years. Like they looked really good analytically, right? And he was on top of being low on Shedeur Sanders and Shedeur being overhyped and all that kind of stuff. And so with Dart, the way that I see it is, number one, I think analytics point to him being a pretty decent quarterback. But then number two, in the dynasty market generally, when you get a first round quarterback like this, they retain value pretty well year over year. You almost have to hope that you only get like 4 or 5 games from Jackson Dart this year, because then you yourself can evaluate him more accurately, all while knowing that the dynasty market is going to be forgiving for a first-year rookie quarterback and allow him to maintain value. A good example, Zach Wilson, Kenny Pickett, they both maintain value year over year.
They sure did.
People make excuses, right? The only guy who didn't was Bryce Young over the last like 10 or so years. And that means that Jackson Dart would have to have arguably the worst rookie season of all time at quarterback in order to not, retain some value for him. So to me, like I think that the Giants did it out of sort of desperation in a way of like trying to hold their jobs year over year and say, hey, look, if you keep us around, we can continue to develop Jackson Dart and things will look good. Dable thinking that. But at the same time, he does bring a little bit of rushing juice. He's got kind of that Josh Allen, throw your body around mentality and attitude. And I'm okay with buying into that when you're not spending a premium pick to get it.
Yeah. You mentioned Jim Sonis's model, the Jay Wood, who you've met, on the internet, the guy who does help me with our model, has his own quarterback model. It's also performed very well. It's also not public, and he's I always say he's shy with it. He's got a towel over it. He just keeps it, he doesn't want everybody to see him in his bikini, but he had Jackson Dart modeled very close to where he had both Bo Nix and Patrick Mahomes in that model, which is not at the very, very top, but pretty darn good at a threshold where he bought into Bo Nix big time. That paid off, and he's feeling the same way about Dart. And so, I've seen that same thing. So the other thing too is I don't know if you have your quarterback, like your dynasty quarterback rankings handy.
Yeah, I got them right next to me.
So I did this for myself. I took a look at where I had Cam Ward and where I had Jackson Dart, and they felt so close to me. I was like, whoa. Like I didn't want them to be, but they were. How close are they for you?
They're pretty far, but
Oh.
but again, so much of it for me has to do with their ability to maintain value and what the market might do with a good or bad rookie season.
But I wonder which one of those two things we disagree on, because I have Jackson Dart at quarterback like 23-ish.
Yeah, I have him at 24.
Okay, so you have Cam Ward way up then. Is that where you're like 12, 13, 14?
Yeah, I have him at 15, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I still prefer like Penix to Ward.
Okay.
You know.
I mean,
to
be fair, I'm looking at it now. I have him at 15 up until QB 19, which is Penix for me, so it goes from, this is in single quarterback, to be fair, not super flex.
Okay.
So I guess they would be closer to super flex now that I'm thinking about it. Whenever you said, whenever I was just looking at my rankings,
true too. You're right.
Yeah. But what's really,
Fields is ahead of both of them in single quarterback.
Right. What's really interesting though, even in single quarterback, when I'm looking at where QB 14 to QB 20 is, it's literally 12, like one round. So they're all pretty scrunched together now that I'm looking at it from that perspective.
I guess my point is it wouldn't take Jackson Dart or Cam Ward much performance to sort of get a little closer, a little further. This
I
is
agree.
fluid still. You know what I mean?
Flex. Yeah, especially in super flex.
If Dart starts playing in like week 4 and you're like, oh, he's good, like it won't take much.
Yeah.
And so I think I think he's going to hold enough of his value. There's certainly, I think camp right now is going to be good for him. I think the offseason before he plays a snap, I think his value will go up.
Yeah.
I think people, you know what I'm saying? I think these are the types of things that are happening. I think it's just some of the tea leaf stuff. This is, again, the ADV, the artificial value, because nothing's going to happen really. I mean, he could be named the starter, I suppose. But even if that doesn't happen between now and real games being played, I think Dart is going to steam a little bit. And so I'm willing to buy into Jackson Dart at that value. The 1-2 turn seems like a great spot.
Me too. Yep.
Yeah,
for sure.
Oh my God. Hey, fading tight ends or what?
I generally do in rookie drafts. I mean, I should have been a little bit more in on even like Brock Bowers last year because he was a special case, and I obviously have some regrets about that. But you're going to win out more often than not. In my opinion, by just buying into them later on in their career.
Totally, yeah, I do too, and especially given I don't, you can organize the next 4 however you like, but the Mason Taylor, Harold Fannin, Arroyo, Ferguson group gives you arbitrage plays on the tight end position.
Yes.
So
I think Terrence Ferguson is potentially like just what will potentially be just as productive as the other 2 tight ends. Like there's at least
have him at 3 as well. Yeah. And the cool thing about the Terrence Ferguson, if you agree at 3, and what the listeners can hear is oftentimes, according to ADP, and a lot of times, maybe in leagues you're in too, I see Mason Taylor as the tight end 3 off the board. And so it starts the tight ends going. So if you're waiting, you can be kind of creative. And as soon as you see Mason Taylor drafted, you can maneuver into one of the next 2 or 3 picks to try and nail yourself Terrence Ferguson.
100%. 100%.
There it is. We're winning people leagues. Tell the people where they can find your awesome work. I love everything you do. Everybody does. You're amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show. Tell everybody where to find you.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it, man. All my stuff is over on lateround.com. You can purchase the Late Round Prospect Guide, subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, all that good stuff. But yeah, you'll hit lateround.com. You'll see my ugly mug, and then you can do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and you might see JJ at the top of the mountain, at the top pedestal stand, with the gold medal around his neck, with the championship trophy above his head in the Dynasty Game Theory Invitational. I took it down 2 years ago. JJ, I don't know if you remember. You probably didn't because you don't watch I was going to win that damn league back to back. I had Brock Purdy driving down the field. All he needed to do was like one more completion, not a touchdown. One more completion, and he took himself out of the final game of week 17.
Remember that
with a boo-boo elbow. And Dobbs came in, and not only did he make a completion, they scored a touchdown.
Yeah, right. Right.
So I lost by 0.8 or whatever the hell it was on a Brock Purdy self-inflicted boo-boo elbow. And I'm really pissed off about it. That's how close I was to back-to-back. You've got a really good shot. I'll give you all the credit in the world. God bless you. So, and it's all because of this Adunze trade, baby.
We'll see. We'll see.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And on behalf of everybody here at the Undroppables, on behalf of everybody here at the Undrafted, on behalf of the greatest podcast producer to ever walk the land, Mr. Michael P. Duncan, you have been joined by the great JJ Zachariason. I am Jax Falcone, and we are out.